Welcome to Permission to Evolve. I'm your host, Brandon Thielk. I'm a performance and life coach. I'm joined by my co-host and producer, Holly Deschenes. So we're coming the day off of my workshop.
Yeah.
Yeah, Unstuck, a day to break free. So today we're just going to be kind of chatting on some reflections and some insights that happened from doing the workshop. Just get a little better sense of what the work looks like and what can come of it. So in your experience, Holly, what did you think yesterday?
I thought it was really good. I think it was a great way to sort of start this idea of in-person work and what that could look like going forward. I think there was a lot of great insights. We had a really great group, happened to be all women, but we had a really great group of folks that showed up and shared. So all of that, I think, really plays into this sort of thing being successful.
Yeah, so we had 8 women total, and it's a combination of people I've worked with before and some new folks that I may be working with. So it was really cool to just kind of take the time to really just sit down and dig in and go through all the concepts of why I do the things I do when I coach. So oftentimes with the client, I'm just trying to get them results as fast as possible. So there's maybe a 15-minute intro of like, hey, these are the things I'm doing and this is why. But to sit down and kind of draw that out and explain step by step this process and why it's so important, I think was really valuable for a lot of the participants. And it starts to elevate that work, right? Where it's just like, okay, now that I have a greater understanding of what he's trying to accomplish, now we start to kind of lower the barrier of resistance. There's more of an acceptance because that's what happens is our mind, like, if it doesn't quite understand something, that does create tension and resistance. And that lack of understanding can kind of build some walls. I think that's an important process and something I look forward to exploring how I can implement more of that before I just dig in and coach with people. Because I felt like things were able to open up and move a lot faster because of that. So that was what was really cool for me in this experience was, people were just kind of ready to run once we got to the coaching portion of the workshop.
Yeah, I felt like it definitely opened people up a lot to have a better understanding of where we were headed, why you were headed in the direction you were. But just thinking for our listeners here, do you want to do like a high level, obviously not the full thing because we're not going to record for 8 hours, but like a high level of like key concepts, what we went through?
So there's 4 different sessions. The first 2 were teaching concepts. And what we're doing is we're going into how the mind and the nervous system work. So the mind-body connection and why that's so important. And basically it all stems from this idea of judgment. So we experience things through the lens that we see it through, and it's based on our judgment. So if I decide something's good, I'm relaxed at ease. I'm not really trying to protect myself. And if I judge something as bad, now I engage this stress response. So if I judge something with as bad, it's usually an incomplete understanding of what's happening in that moment. So my mind's trying to conceptualize what's going on with me. So our mind it's a record of our past, but it's also a meaning-making machine. So it assigns meaning to our experience. So we have these 3 levels. We have the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, and the unconscious mind. And our biggest breakthroughs come from getting to the unconscious mind. And so that's our core belief systems, is who we believe we are based on what's happened to us. And that includes our adaptations of how I need to behave or interact with people in order to stay safe. It's our strategy to try and earn approval, acceptance, and love. If I was raised in a situation where there's a lot of tension and stress in the household, I might not feel that emotional support. I might not feel like I'm loved because maybe the caregivers are stuck in this survival mode. Okay. And so along with the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious, we also have another 3-layer kind of model that we look at where it's survival, emotional, and then conscious thought. Basically, we can't really give energy to that conscious thought if we're stuck in survival or if we're stuck in negative emotional patterns. And so these things, they're coping strategies that we feel like serve us, but oftentimes these things are very outdated. So what was needed at one stage in my life is generally what holds me back at the next. And so I'm operating the same way because I feel like that's what's safe, but I might be out of this environment where I no longer need those things to protect myself. But my mind and body don't know that yet. And so we can intellectualize these things and understand them, but then the embodiment process is the key I like to get to. And that's why this work, we're always directing people into what they feel, because that's the access point. That's how we dig into the unconscious and try and find out what you've decided about things in your life that won't allow you to move forward. Oftentimes that's fear-based thinking. And so I'm trying to protect myself from some sort of pain. And so once we start to dig deep and find out where these decisions were made, now we can start to strip the judgment out of them. Okay. The judgment was necessary, but it was also based on an immature perspective. And oftentimes these things, like I said, we need to show up differently. We need to be more relaxed, at ease. We need to be able to own our confidence. And so confidence and fear are not part of the same equation, right? I'm going to be in this place of lockdown, and confidence is this ability to be comfortable in my own skin and just really own my abilities and skills. That's a lot of these blocks that we have. And the access point is, so there's a bridge between the conscious, subconscious. And so that's what's readily available to us. And the subconscious is communicating to us through feelings and sensations. And then it's also telling us a story about what we're focused on. So my conscious awareness is just the spotlight of like, this is what I'm focused on. And then my subconscious is feeding me information about what I believe about that subject that I'm focused on. And so if I've made judgments about something that's bad or I need to protect myself from it, that's going to activate a stress response. That's where we have to take the access point is we go to the subconscious, which is the feeling. And then underneath that is what we truly believe about that situation. And so that's where we take that bridge from the subconscious to the unconscious. So there's many different ways to do this. Hypnosis is a common one people talk about. It's kind of putting you into this state where you can surrender and you're not actively engaged with something. That's why I'm a big supporter of meditation practices of like, you're just trying to slow the mind down. You're trying to get past those barriers of resistance so that you can go deeper into yourself, because that's really where you start to discover this stuff. And so many of these things, we've outgrown them, but we're still carrying them. When we're confronted with them, they really start to not make sense for our life. They have a lot less power when we just kind of turn to face them and we're just like, yeah, that's not really what I'm dealing with anymore. And so that's where a lot of cool insights come, is just like, oh, like this thing I've feared all along that's holding me back. Maybe there's not a lot of legs to it. Why do I need to feel that way when I've created maybe a peaceful environment now? Maybe I have financial resources now. And, a big one you commonly see a lot of fear-based thinking is around money and financial resources, because it's just like, if you were raised in an environment where that was a big area of stress and maybe there's like a lot of conflict and stress around it, we get locked into that fear mode. And so even if our situation's drastically different, that stuff's still playing in the background and it shows up as this tension and stress. And often it manifests as like kind of weird behaviors, right? People that, complain all the time when they have like excess and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I know it was just yesterday, so it's not been a ton of reflection time, but when you kind of reflect on this in-person work, what the group worked on yesterday, do you have any sort of big insights about the difference for you of doing it in person versus virtually? Because I know you have done some group workshops in the past that were virtual. So I'm just wondering if you talk a little bit about the connection or the work between those two differences.
I think it was like helpful that one, it was like an intimate group setting, less than 10 people. Most people kind of knew each other to some degree and are interested in this work. With the setting, you have to create this safe container for people to be vulnerable and open up. That's difficult when you bring a bunch of strangers together. And so I think it was helpful that a number of people like knew each other or kind of knew each other by association. And that can be a barrier if we feel very judged by the people around us. But if we feel safe, that can be a huge amplifier, because it's like, when one person shares something, now it's like the other people are seeing themselves in that situation. And then their mind starts working on how that fits in with their life. But then also it starts to spring off new ideas of like, oh, I can see my own situations a little bit differently now by witnessing somebody else. And so transformation is really about kind of creating that safe space to really just witness somebody, to make them feel understood and seen and heard and respected and really loved, actually, and supported. Because many times these painful events, it really just kind of creates this isolation and feeling alone with things. And like we're left to sort it out on our own. You can't really solve things at the level that they're created. So if my mind thinks a certain way, I'm not going to think my way out of that situation. Generally, it's like I have to regulate, I have to create space in my body to engage with the situation differently. And in that kind of softer approach, now I can see different aspects of that situation. And so we're always just trying to complete this puzzle of like, how do we turn the negative into a positive? And that's when that situation collapses on itself and it neutralizes. So that's where we get integration, where we can really start to embody things. The group in person is really helpful to make a lot of connections that might not be obvious and being able to learn from other people. And that's saying, so in my session work, I prefer to work over the phone, because like I'm asking people to like feel their body and breathe into certain things. And usually that means closing their eyes, right?
Yeah.
And so that's this, if somebody's looking at you while you're trying to feel, that can be a barrier, right? Because we might feel like self-conscious or whatever it is, right? And so that was what was really cool is there were some participants that kind of went to their own little place, right? And they felt safe in doing so, which I thought was really valuable. But then, yeah, it just kind of seemed like everybody was willing to go there, even with all the eyes on them and the attention. And so that was cool to see. And yeah, so virtual stuff, it's, often bringing a bunch of strangers together, staying maybe more general with things. So yeah, with the virtual situation, it's kind of got to stay higher level. You can't really dig that deep. Well, and also there's a time constraint of that. So the whole day, I get to work with each participant one-on-one in front of the group for about 30 minutes or so. And that was cool to just kind of not have to rush things and just really be able to sit with somebody and take them through things. And so, yeah, I think there's so many dynamics here that made for a lot of cool breakthroughs and insights for people was that, and the main idea is feeling safe and supported by the people around them. And so that's very difficult to replicate when you have strangers, when you have, maybe people that are operating at different levels. Maybe it's just like, oh, I'm just kind of starting to explore this work. And then you have other people that have maybe been at it for a while. And so there's like a gap there. And so it's like, how do I have a message that can speak to all of that? That can be difficult. But that's what the teaching aspect, it was really cool to just lay those foundations so everybody was able to get on the same page, even if they're newer to the work.
And you definitely had a pretty varied mix of, to your earlier point, of folks that were familiar with the work that you do, but then some folks who have done a massive amount of other types of work, traditional therapy or even things that are maybe not seen as traditional, like EDMR or brain spotting or whatever, which I think your work is close to some of those.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably a mixture.
Yeah. I do think, to your point of like seeing the group all together and listening to everybody's story, I think that idea of like finding these like moments of community, even if this particular group of women could get back together at any time. They're all local to the Madison area, but just in general, even just like a moment in community like that and the chance for all of them to be witnessed, I think was a super cool thing, as well as to your point about like seeing each other in the stories that everybody told. So I think that was pretty powerful as well. I know I had a couple of eye-opening moments where I was like, oh wow, we're way more similar than maybe I would have initially thought.
When you have those similarities, now that fosters connection. So
Yeah.
I understand what they're going through much better now. So that does create a lot of compassion. And and in some of these situations, you can't help but, really feel for people. We've all been dealt different hands, and some are more extreme versions than other. At the end of the day, it's the human experience. We all have different varying degrees of similar issues. And so there's when you get the extreme version and everybody's able to witness that, now it's, oh, I see myself in this, but it's like mine's easier to work through now because like I can kind of see the depths of how an experience can go.
Yeah.
And so struggling with something and we feel alone with it, no matter the magnitude of it, it's kind of just like, yeah, nobody understands me, nobody gets it. I feel alone with it, but then also it's super personal to us, right? But then, and that's things we don't want to ever diminish what you're feeling and what you're going through. It's not a comparison game. You don't compare my pain to your pain because we also, based on the sequence of events, we internalize information differently, right? Where it's just like I might draw different conclusions about the same experience than you might. And so it's important to kind of see that's one of the interesting things is you can be led down so many different paths and they're just different expressions of similar ideas, right? That's kind of the creative ability of the mind to be able to, I get to assign meaning to things. And so based on everything that's happened for me, this is how I see it. And that's the differences between all of us, right? Is like I'm internalizing information a little bit differently than you. And the things we can connect over is kind of the common themes and ideas that it's just like, oh, I can see how, that was challenging for this person and I see myself in that. And so it's being witnessed, not feeling alone with it anymore. And it's that vulnerability that really opens up that connection. That's super cool to see when you just kind of see the light bulb go off in people or, oh, now I can see this a little bit differently. Because really in my coaching, that's all I'm trying to do. I'm like, how do we see the situation in a more productive way where it's not stuck in this place of pain? And all we're trying to do is get to neutral ground because that's what objective thinking is. And that's where I'm like in tune with reality. And the information is no longer being filtered through pain anymore because the pain's only created by the story that we tell ourselves, right? And in the moment of an intense event, like, yes, that's painful, but yeah, we can move through that and process that, but it's our mind and our judgment of that situation that keeps us reliving it over and over and over again. And because we're trying to figure out how to protect ourselves from that happening in the future. And so we develop all these strategies. We start to shut down our life and play smaller and all these things. It's more of about limiting ourselves to avoid the pain. But if I can just form a different relationship with the pain, I can start to see some gifts and skills that came out of that event and how it drove me down certain paths. It is a journey, and is the main idea is like what happened and it's in the past. And so it's kind of like whenever you're ready, we want to get to that place of acceptance about it, because when we accept it, now I can start to transform it and soften the energy around it. And then that's what gives me this new path forward. But then when I'm stripping the story and the emotion out of it, and I'm able to see the different dynamics at play, now I start to gain wisdom about how to navigate my life more confidently moving forward, because our mind just like takes a snapshot of something in that moment of stress and it draws all these conclusions about it. But often that's a very incomplete picture. Do any of us do our best thinking when we're under stress? Like, absolutely not.
No.
It's that idea of like, well, I'm under stress, everything's speeding up on me, and I'm just grabbing whatever information I can. But then we also have, if it's extremely overwhelming, we might have some dissociation going on. We might have like, I'm disconnecting from myself because it's too painful. And so the information I'm gathering from that situation is going to be incomplete, or it might be very inaccurate, where I'm not seeing what led up to that situation. I'm not seeing my role in it. I'm not seeing if it had nothing to do with me and it was actually just two other people that were in pain.
Right.
So it's like, there's so many different dynamics here. And so all we're trying to do is really depersonalize whatever happened and zoom out so I can see the bigger picture. And when I do that, my nervous system starts to soften the tension and it starts to let these things go, because like I can see the different dynamics and it's actually, I'm depersonalizing from it. Most of these things are never actually about us. It's just what people are doing to us when they're functioning from a place of pain and stress.
Yeah, for sure. While you were talking through that, I was thinking a little bit about one of the things you did in the teaching section, and maybe we could talk a little bit about that. just in general, because it applies so much to the work you do and is foundational. And maybe at some point we need to do a whole podcast on this topic. We talked a little bit about early childhood development and the impact of that, right, in terms of how you develop these patterns to move forward, survival, etc.
Yeah, so they commonly say the 0 to 7 age range is a very important time, and that's because we haven't really developed our conscious thinking yet. So our subconscious is wide open, and that's where we program things into our system. This is largely formed by the environment we're in and the stresses around us, and we don't have this conscious filter to depersonalize things. We're kind of just a part of our environment. We haven't created that separation yet. Through conscious thought, I can be like, oh, that's not true for me, and I can reject things, and I don't have to internalize information. But in that 0 to 7 range, we haven't developed that ability yet. And so largely our beliefs are just formed by what we're told from the people around us. Those situations kind of mold us too. When we're in stressful environments, where there's a lot of tension, oftentimes there is like very little emotional control, or there's very little emotional support. If somebody's upset with me, like I see the look of disappointment on their face, and then I might get the silent treatment and like all those things. And so that's like very isolating. And then, yeah, I might be punished and then kind of put off on my own. I don't have the faculties to really like sort through that. And so that's why it's important for parents to be able to help their kids regulate through stress, is because they can offer the better perspective on the other side of the stress. If I'm left alone with it, generally the kid's going to make it about themselves. And it's going to be through a negative lens of, I'm not good enough. There's something I did wrong. It's something I created this in some way, shape, or form. That's what kind of starts the foundation of like how we see situations. When you have somebody that's really insecure or self-conscious, that's going to be because they always think they're doing something wrong in every situation. So these things, they start at that stage, and that's that level of the unconscious that we're talking about. Is these things just get imprinted and they're just kind of left in that place. And so that's why it's really important to update the mind, to bring the more mature perspective to the situation when we have that ability, or to have people around us that can do that, because it can be really debilitating. It can shut down a lot of areas of our life. It can really affect our decision making and ability to trust ourselves, and ultimately confidence and your ability to make your way in the world. And so when we get plugged into these stress responses, it can be shut down. It can be, my mind goes blank. I can't think straight. I could be disoriented, and that can show up in a corporate meeting or something. Anytime you're dealing with an authority figure, if I have these protection mechanisms in place, like I'm not able to shine because my body's trying to protect me. So it goes back to my default mode of like what I learned to do in those time periods. We set that foundation in 0 to 7. And so everything from that point kind of starts to just stack on those similar ideas, where I may think something's going on presently, but I'm only relating to it right now because of that foundation. So that's where we make the adjustment, and that's where we can also make rapid changes. If I'm externally focused on a problem and I'm just trying to solve it out here, I'm trying to override every part of myself that says it's not okay, it's not safe, right? It creates this internal conflict, this tug of war. And it's a battle I can't really win. I have to use willpower to try and force things to happen, rather than regulating myself, coming to peace with it, addressing it from this calm, centered manner. I can start to see better options than I'm just going to react to the stress, right? And so we're trying to step out of reaction. We're trying to take a step back and look at the situation differently. But then in that space, now I can plan new actions. I can show up differently because I'm no longer just reacting to whatever's happening to me. So I view whatever's happening to you as a mirror to whatever's happened to you in the past. And so we go to the past because that's where you form those ideas, and that's what your software is telling you. Okay. So we've programmed these things into the system, and you have these strategies, and you're going to continue to operate on those strategies until they no longer work. When they're no longer working, that's basically, it's going to be shown to you in your life that I keep seeing the same problem across the board in all these different areas because I'm showing up the same way. And so I have to come to peace with my past so I have access to that higher level of thinking of like, okay, what's actually a better way for me to go about this now? That's where we take steps in the unknown. And we call those risks, but my mind doesn't have data for it yet. So it thinks it's scary, okay, because it's attached to my past. And that's what keeps me operating in these patterns over and over again is because that's what I know. And that's how I've learned to be safe. That's what's creating my problems at this level. So what was used to solve them is now what's creating them. And that's the thing is they're just not optimal because it's coming from a level of thought of like a 5-year-old. And so we're just updating the mind. So anytime you see like big emotions behind something where you're just like, yeah, that was like a really big reaction for a small problem, right? That's what we're talking about. It's like, well, that idea has probably shown up over and over again for that person in their life, like 1,000 times. And they feel really unsafe about it, right? It's going back and shifting those dynamics of how they relate to that idea. That's the thing is it's an accumulation of stress. When we're younger, when we're not very conscious, it's just like we're getting all this feedback, but we're not really in tune with it. But so as we start to recognize that, hey, these problems are showing up all over the place, like what's that about? That's where we're being called to go deeper to understand ourselves better. Okay. We try to, it's a self-discovery process where we're just trying to open up of like, okay, why do I see this way? Why do I believe this? Are these even my beliefs? Are these even my values? Like those types of things. Because most of this stuff I call it default settings. That's what was given to us. You didn't have a choice. It just got downloaded into you basically. And so all we're trying to do is based on everything you've lived, you've come to new conclusions, but sometimes you don't allow yourself to fully go there. And that's where we have hesitation and resistance and wanting to hide and like all that stuff is like, well, I believe these things now, or I want to behave this way now, but still don't feel safe with that. So there's like this internal conflict. And, peak performance is when I can fully align with something. That means my mind and body are supported in what I'm doing. And so that means I've reconciled the unconscious and subconscious to be on board with what I'm doing. Okay. So when I can fully commit to something, that's where I can move heaven and earth. And it's actually a lot easier because I don't have all the conflicts that are pulling me all over the board. So that's why, it's what do you want? And how do we align with it? It's just going to be like, well, I need to address the things that are in conflict with what I'm trying to accomplish. And so that's going to be that early development of this is what I believe about this, and it's in direct conflict with what I want. And so I can't really get there because I'm not like allowing myself to go there. But we really can't create something that we don't really believe because our beliefs are our operating system. It's our rules for life. So if I believe I can't have something, like I'm not going to get it. So because it's just like, even if it showed up for me, I wouldn't feel safe with it. So I'm going to push it away or reject it. And you see this with relationship. You see this with career decisions. You see all these different aspects of like, well, yeah, you were given an opportunity, but you couldn't see that and you found a problem with it and you threw it away. Right.
Yeah. And one of the things you said yesterday too is like, I think you said it yesterday, it could have been on another podcast, but this idea of all this stuff is what leads us to those like self-sabotaging behaviors. So
The sabotage is just part of me wants it, but then part of me like doesn't believe it's safe.
yeah,
So if it shows up and I'm not ready for it, I'm gonna ruin it somehow,
yeah, for sure. So when we think about moving forward from an event like this, a single day is maybe a little different than a retreat setting where you're like literally leaving a place and have to come back to real life. But there would be an element of that. You just had this very safe container where you could say all these things that maybe you don't feel comfortable saying in your day to day. Might have some emotional changes or feelings that you've worked through. And now you've got to go back and live your life and take care of your family and do your job and be a productive member of society. What would you say are like the next steps or the things you would want people to focus on coming off of an event like this?
One of the big problems in the self-development world is like this idea because, you create the space for a day or a weekend or whatever. And then people are like confronted and they're like feel great about it, but then it's just like, okay, now I'm going back to my life and I'm just confronted with everything that's wrong again. Some people like really struggle with that and then they like give up, right? Because they're just like, well, yeah, this feels great, but it's almost like it's better if I don't have those experiences because that makes this more tolerable.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. There is no instantaneous results. Like everything's a process, everything's an ongoing, just continuously working the puzzle of your life. But it's important we create the new insights. We try and shift some of the energy to kind of create more of a courage to act differently. But ultimately it's up to the person to kind of dig in and find that consistency. It's a daily process. These things aren't kind of one-off things. You're on this journey, things are going to continuously come up that are going to challenge you. And if we can get some of the breakthroughs and find new insights so I can look at those problems differently. Now I've created the awareness though. That's the key, is like you take the insights and then you go to your life, but then it's kind of like, okay, I have to train myself to see these things that I'm confronted with every day through a different lens that allows me to make progress and move forward. And so this integration process is like, well, yeah, in order to apply what I learned, I need to start to take some small steps. And I need to make some sort of commitment of like, how can I integrate this into my life consistently where, I'm not just leaving it in that one-off day and then going back to my life. It's like, okay, how do I bring these new things and start to work the puzzle of, okay, this is a problem person that I'm dealing with regularly. How do I try to see them through a different lens? And through the experiences we've gained where we see like, oh, everybody's really just struggling with stuff, right? So that can be a valuable thing of like, okay, this person's just operating out of pain. And we have this little dance going on because it's showing me my pain too, right? And so all we want to do is create some sort of container in our own life that we can regularly do, right? So that might mean 15 minutes of just sitting in silence and journaling or meditation. Because if I have that version going on, now I can make continuous progress because it's just like, okay, I get activated with stress. I'm seeing it a little bit differently. I'm starting to know that there's tools to work through this. I don't have to accept it as the way it is. So I take the step back and I go create my own container and my own safe space to really just get in tune with myself and try and shift how I'm seeing each situation. That's really a daily process, and it's been that way for as long as I can remember. Many people that are deep in the work, they have some version of that. Even if it's just like, okay, every Sunday, like I'm going to like unpack the week, something like that. If you can't do it daily, if there's too much going on. But once again, it's about prioritizing yourself and healing from things. We need space to do that. And so that might mean taking some small steps in terms of forming some boundaries around your time or shifting your priorities so that you can align with these ideas. And so that's kind of that personal responsibility piece. Like if you really want to heal, if you really want to work through these things, if you really want change, it has to become a priority in your life. And now might not be the time, it could be like, well, okay, I have some things that I'm still trying to work out but I might set this as a goal like 6 months from now. Okay, I'm going to revisit these things and then I'm going to start to build those practices. Just like an athlete has to practice every day to maintain their skill, like that's what this is. Everything in life is that way. Like you have to engage with it on a regular basis to get better at it. And the awareness is created and it's just like, how do I continue to build the awareness is the question. And I do that through whatever I experience that stresses me out. I go remove myself, create a safe container for me to take a look at that, regulate myself, take some deep breaths and try and ask myself different questions about that same situation.
Yeah, you make a good point. It's keeping it going, continuing the work, going deeper. Well, I know we just talked the integration piece of this. We've kind of talked about the group of women or whatever, but I think maybe it would be interesting just as we're thinking about how other people might relate to this, if we just touched on not their stories specifically, but some of the key themes that came up through the work yesterday.
I would say, well, primarily because it was a group of women, people pleasing was a big aspect of that. And that's a primary strategy many people use to stay safe, right? Is like, oh, I don't want to disappoint other people. So I'm going to go above and beyond. And that might be at the expense of myself or self-sacrificing in order to not disappoint others, not let them down. And that, generally you've probably been let down by a lot of other people in the process, right? So it's just like when you know what something feels like, you don't want to do that to other people. If you're a compassionate, good person generally. But that's like once again, that's like comes at our own expense and that's depleting over time. The longer that goes on, the heavier it gets. And then now we start missing out on opportunities or we're not living the life we want because we're sacrificing it for everybody else. So I'd say that was a big theme is just kind of getting lost in other people's problems and not really connecting to ourselves and getting clear on what we want. That's a big challenge. A lot of times, like I said, that comes from being hurt yourself, like where you're just like, well, I don't want to be like the person that hurt me. And so now I'm just going to give myself away. That's a common struggle, and, especially people interested in this work. Well, they always say like, the people that go to therapy, it's because people, the other people won't go to therapy or whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
People go to therapy because the person that's hurting them won't, right?
Yeah.
They're kind of stuck in their emotions. Now I have to be the target of all this person's issues. And that's a really like painful place to be where it's just like, well, I'm trying to stay safe and protect myself from this person. And so a lot of times you're drawn to this work because you're trying to figure out solutions to be like, how do I go around that?
Yeah.
That's kind of it's a big idea. Like when people are drawn to self-awareness work or mindfulness, it's because it's just like, well, the external stuff's not working. I tried to have conversations with this person, or I tried to take different steps and nothing worked. They were just really stubborn, all that kind of stuff. And so we kind of step out of like trying to fix other people and then we start to fix ourselves. But then it's always left in this place of fixing things. This work's really about trying to find peace with yourself. And once we do that, I don't deserve to be treated that way. And so that leads to bigger questions of like, okay, how do I need to realign my life to be in support of like this new version of me that like, okay, if I am going to love myself and treat myself well, like, what would that person do? How would they show up? What actions would they take? And that might mean removing certain people from your life, or it might mean engaging with them differently. So, I always recommend when, people have those, especially volatile personalities, it might be a family member, it might be somebody really close to you. Well, only way anybody learns is through consequences. And our power is always to walk away. Like that's really the only power we have in those dynamics is I have to start to limit access to people that aren't treating me. That's going to be a combination of removing myself, and I may have to engage with this person still, but it's, well, like, yeah, now I need to communicate boundaries and I need to give them consequences if they cross those boundaries. That can be a very difficult process. There's a lot of tough conversations can happen, a lot of tension, stress. It's like, how is this person going to react? So you take it in layers. It's just like we take small steps to try and improve it over time. And, there's no easy answer because we can't control other people. And so it's up to them whether they want to change or not. And so if somebody's unwilling to change and I keep growing and I keep getting stronger within myself, there is just like generally a breaking point to those types of relationships where, they might have to fall away or yeah, it's like I might, if I'm seeing them couple times a week, I might push that to like once a month or once every 6 months or something. You keep just distancing yourself so that that person has that space to reflect, because if they're doing things and then I'm just reacting to that through my strategies where I'm just falling into people pleasing or just kind of going along with whatever, there's no accountability in that. And so that person, if they're a taker, it's kind of like they're the only ones getting anything out of that.
Yeah.
So it's just, well, yeah, so I'm not really getting anything out of this either. It's an imbalanced relationship. And so like, why am I actually like staying in it? It's generally because we felt like we had to in that previous version, right? Like the childhood Like I had no choice. Was my home environment. These were the people that were around me. I had to put up with it. I had to just adopt these strategies in order to deal with that person. But it's just somebody that's wounded, has immature emotions, hasn't really looked at themselves. And as long as they're getting what they want, like they have no reason to look at themselves. So that's why we need the consequences. We need something to shift the dynamic so that they no longer expect the same things. Okay. And so once they're not getting it for me, they might go somewhere else. That's an option. Or if everybody starts to close the door,
Mhm.
now they're left with themselves. And so that's really their opportunity to grow and change is if nobody's going along with those behaviors anymore. Many different versions of people pleasing, but I'd say that's kind of like a core idea of I don't feel safe to say no to this person, or they guilt and shame me, and that makes me feel really bad about myself. But when they guilt and shame me, it's because like I already like believe those things about myself. So it's just kind of pulling on those strings. And so that's really what we do with this work is we try to clean that up. It's like, do you need to feel guilty about that? Have you learned the lesson? If you did do something wrong, have you learned the lesson, and have you reconciled that? And do you carry yourself differently now? The shame is often, you know, people just place that on us to shut us down so they can do whatever they want. That's often how the form it takes. And so it's just kind of seeing that for what it is. It's just they have this need they're trying to get met, and so they feel like they can do those things in order to meet that need, but it's at my expense. And so healthy relationships it's a balance, right? It's giving and receiving. It's not all about me. We all carry pain. We all have
Mhm.
things that I feel like I'm lacking that I want from other people, right? I can do that work to sort out what's going on within me so that I can shift those dynamics. And, I'd say that's probably, one of the biggest patterns. And that's just different expressions of it that I saw. But it's like, well, yeah, where am I giving up my power? Where am I not participating fully in my life? Because maybe it was just easier to go along with things. So when we're dealing with challenging people, and they're throwing tantrums and doing all the things, it's like, well, yeah, it's just like easier to keep them at bay, right? It's just easier to give them what they want. Now it's just, what am I losing in that process? And so it's kind of seeing that what was necessary at one stage is now that's going to increasingly get more depleting. And it also builds a lot of bitterness and resentment towards people. They're not healthy relationships anyway. We're always going to feel better about ourselves when we're owning our power, when we're really connected to ourselves, and we're not just like blowing in the wind going along with what's going on around us. It's about creating that space, getting stronger within yourself, and then taking new actions to reconcile the relationship. And sometimes that may mean like, okay, if this is too intense, like it needs to fall away. What am I even hanging on to?
We're wrapping up the sort of in-person work, and you're gonna be heading back to Nashville. But we've been talking a little bit about what the future could look like in terms of these type of events. If people are interested, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share a little bit about what we're thinking about. We don't have any dates yet, so like don't hold us to anything if you're listening and whatever. But of course, probably the best way to find out more information is going to be by signing up for Brandon's newsletter. We'll get to that,
Mm.
but it I do want to talk a little bit about where this kind of work could go, what you sort of envision for it.
Yeah, so I'm going to start doing pretty regular kind of masterclass, like virtual type stuff to try for like introductory work to just kind of get people's bearings on this a little bit better. So that's just like an hour online. I'll be doing some of those. I'll be doing one in November here. So also, yeah, it's going to be leading into kind of more workshop type settings, but then ultimately we'd like to create an experience like a retreat setting to just kind of really pluck people out of their lives for a couple days and just go deeper. And that's the thing is when you can have an extended period of this type of space, now we can set better foundations that might be able to be stronger and outlast the day-to-day grind. So I think, there's a lot of value in creating a couple days of just being able to let it all loose, because it's just when we're engaged with the stresses of our lives, it's difficult. We have all these patterns and this autopilot functioning of like, I just have to do the things I do. And so if you can remove people from that, like the longer the better usually, because that's where we can really get some deep rooted like awarenesses of like, okay, yeah, like I feel more equipped to move forward this way. So yeah, I think, workshops are good for like it's an extension of, okay, we have the hour option, but then, okay, if you're not doing the one-to-one coaching, then the group stuff, some people like really prefer community. So it's finding opportunities to do like day workshops to go a little bit deeper, and then a retreat setting would be even deeper. And so, yeah, intensives are cool. Like I love doing them. I love doing one-on-one intensives as well. You've done one. So it's where you just kind of sit and dig in for an extended period of time. It's cool to operate without the big time constraints, where you can just like allow things to unfold as they need to. And so, because there's just so many layers and levels to this work, and the deeper you go, the stronger you get. So it's about kind of creating containers for that, so that if people really want to make some big changes, they can be supported in that.
Yeah. I'm very excited to think about and maybe work on plans for those for the next year. So it's been really exciting and so good to do a couple of podcasts in person again before we go back to staring at each other through glass.
Yeah, I definitely prefer the in-person, but
Yeah.
gotta do what you gotta do, right?
All right. So is there anything you want to wrap on, or should we talk a little bit about where people can find you, all that?
Yeah, I think it's just, if you're really curious about this work, I don't know, it's just been so life-changing for me. I'm obsessed with it because it's just like there's no problem that can't be solved. It's just your relationship to it that's keeping you stuck. It just doesn't have to be that way. And I always say it's like, well, yeah, you can struggle with something on your own for like 5 years or more, or maybe the rest of your life, or we can sometimes have a conversation and sort that out in an hour, right? It doesn't have to be that big a deal, but we all get in our own way. It's difficult to see any other way. If it's what's shown up for you repeatedly, it's hard to believe that things could be different. That was also something that came up, is just like, well, I've been doing these things so long, I can't even imagine what it's like for things to be different. That's a common experience as well. And so you don't really know until you start to take the steps. That's one of the exciting things about it, is you can kind of remake and remold yourself at every level. I believe life should be an ongoing growth journey where there's always new things you're excited about. And in that process, as you move towards those, you have to release and let go of the old stuff that's no longer working. It really is an ongoing process. And if you can really take the time to take a step back and really establish the tools, like, it does really impact you in so many ways, but then it affects your outlook on life dramatically, where what used to feel impossible now feels possible, and it actually feels optimistic. The work's there whenever you want it. But it's up to you to make that decision, and it's a deeply personal decision. But sometimes, it's just like maybe we're getting in our own way a little bit too much, and we need some outside perspectives to try and get things to move. So, yeah, definitely. If you're interested, you can reach out on my website, brandonthielk.com. Schedule a free 30-minute strategy session where I get a sense of what you've got going on and how I can help. Also, you can register for my newsletter on my website. So every Monday I send out the lightning report, give you some updates on the business and some reflection prompts for the week. I just pick a theme and give you some things to focus on. And that's with most things, it's best to start small, and that's a good area to start. And if you want to follow along on Instagram and YouTube at Brandon Thielk, and TikTok at bthielk.
Yeah, all those links will be in the show notes or the description if you're watching this on YouTube.
Well, thanks for listening, guys. This was fun.
Yeah, this has been a good one. It's good to see you in real life.
Yep.
All right, talk to you
Bye.
later.